Committee to order. The time is 1:30. We'll do a roll call. Ms. Zalatel?
Here.
Mr. Weddleton?
He will be absent unless we need him online.
Okay. Mr. Tromley?
Here.
Ms. Boken?
Here.
And we have a quorum of 4.
Yes, we do.
Aaron, will you please do the public involvement announcement?
Of course. I have to read off of the script, so I don't have it memorized yet, so I apologize. All AMATS committee meetings are open to the public, and the public is provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. Business items are first presented on by a staff or consultant. Then the committee will have a chance for discussion. After that, the public will be invited to provide formal comment, and then the item will come back before the committee for final discussion and action.
Thank you. Action item 3. Do we have approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Zalatel, seconded by Mr. Tromley. Do we have any changes? Hearing none. Any objections to adopting the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Action item 4. We have before us the minutes from the October 28th, 2021 and November 18th, 2021 for approval. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All right, moved by Ms. Zalatel, seconded by Mr. Tromley. Are there any changes or discussion? All right, hearing none. Any objections to approving the minutes? All right, hearing none. The October 28th, 2021 and November 18th, 2021 minutes are approved. Moving into action items. Action item A, 2022-23 Unified Planning Work Program and 2022 budget. Aaron, will you be presenting?
Yes, just a second. Did you see the message from Ms. Zalatel about the link to the agenda? Please. Yes, I ask everyone bear with us. We're in kind of a transitional mode. As you know, Craig Lyon has accepted a position as the planning director, and I'm filling in as the acting manager. So Craig is here to help out with a few things because I was not at the TAC meeting that covered a number of items on the agenda, so he'll be filling in for some of that information. So, okay, your first action item before you is the Unified Planning Work Program. This is a federally required document that outlines the tasks and activities that will be worked on by AMATS and our transportation planning partners over the next 2 years. So we do a 2-year program, the narrative itself, which is the first item, and then you have a budget every year that we have to bring forward for approval as well. Just so you know, the narrative was put out for a 30-day public comment period as required by our public participation plan, and it received no comments. So we have nothing to present on that one. And the budget does not go out for a public comment period. It just comes to you guys for final approval before we send everything off to FHWA and FTA for approval. The TAC did go through the work program and budget, and correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, but they had no changes to anything in there?
That is correct.
Thank you. And so before you today is approval of the narrative and budget.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions or comments from the committee? Hearing none.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So my question is just if someone hasn't or hasn't been doing this for very long, is this pretty much looks like a continuation budget. Is that a fair assessment?
No, we have to redo the budget. So it's kind of confusing. It's a 2-year program. And so with a budget every year. The second year tends to be kind of a continuation budget, but not really. Right now for this one, it's a brand new budget. because we're starting a brand new 2-year period. You will notice that a lot of the tasks are the same from year to year because a lot of them are requirements that we have to do to fulfill. However, there are some new tasks in this one, most notably the TDM, the Transportation Demand Management Study that we'll have to be doing, TSMO, the study for that. The safety plan, I believe, is a new one that is added in here as well. So we do update it every 2 years, every year, depending on how things go, to kind of add in some new tasks.
Okay, so the base budget looks a lot like it did 2 years ago because there are ongoing requirements, and then those 3 that you particularly called out are some of the new items in this new 2-year budget cycle.
That is correct. I think Craig has something to add.
The only thing I was going to add, Ms. Zolotel, was that so we get an allocation from the state of Alaska. Well, the funding comes from the Federal Highway Administration for these planning funds, but it comes through the state of Alaska, and they portion out a portion of the funds to AMATS and a portion up to Fairbanks. And so the dollar figure that we get it changes a little bit from year to year, but it's usually about the same. So we make the budget fit for what we need, as opposed to we go through there and figure out what we're going to do and then figure out how much it's going to cost. They tell us how much we're going to get, and we figure what the tasks are going to be. And then if we have some extra funding, sometimes we'll put that into very small contracts, such as we have a modeling support contract and other things of that nature. So I guess it's kind of a continuation budget because it's very similar to last year's. I don't remember exactly the difference, but it's maybe $60,000 or $70,000 more than what we had last year. It's not too much more.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Any comments from the public? Seeing none. What is the will of the committee?
Mr. Chain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Defer to Aaron.
Yes, I actually have a recommended change that we need to add to the UPWP. I received an email from FHWA this morning about some additional language we need to add in regarding our match. So the UPWP, since it is federal funded, we do have a match requirement, and how AMATS meets that match is in-kind match support services provided by the municipal traffic department. We do list that in the actual budget itself. It is under, it's in one of the columns where we say MOA operating in-kind match. It's one of the yellow columns. We don't have the columns numbered, and I apologize for that. We'll have to work on that in the future. So we do spell it out here in the budget itself. However, we are not as clear in the narrative about where the match is coming from that is an in-kind match. So we were asked by FHWA to add in a paragraph or statement that discusses how the in-kind match is derived, where it comes from, how it's calculated, what type of work is occurring, when that work is occurring, so during the period of the UPWP, and that the MOA work is not being completed using other federal funds. So these are a lot of the requirements that we have to meet for in-kind match, because if you're paying something with federal funds, you can't use that as a way to match these federal funds. So we already do all this behind the scenes, but we were asked to just put something a little more clear in the document. We do actually have a section in the narrative for match where we talk about it. So my recommendation is we just add another paragraph in there that meets these requirements that we've been asked to by FHWA.
Thank you, Aaron. So at this point, what is the will of the committee with the input from Aaron?
Move to approve.
Moved by Mr. Tromley,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Alatel. And I think at this point, would we need a motion to have the addition?
Please.
Added in?
Move to add the paragraph.
Thank you, Ms. Pope.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Tromley. All right, are there any objections to approving the motion as amended? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Moving to action item B, 2023 to 2026 proposed TIP criteria. Aaron, will you be presenting?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start, and then I'll ask Craig to fill in for a few things. So really quickly, you've seen the criteria before. We've been working on this criteria for about a year, but I'm just going to kind of do a quick reiteration of what it is and what are our next steps. So the TIP criteria is kind of the first step in developing our TIP. Our TIP is a 4-year program that outlines funding for projects, construction projects, roadway projects, non-motorized projects, or plans, funding that goes to congestion mitigation, air quality, and also includes things in there for transit, has to show their federal funds in there, and we have DOT's federal funds listed in there as well. So we have to update this every 4 years, and as I said, the first step is the criteria. We develop criteria that we use to help score and rank projects during a call for nominations. So this criteria is about a year's worth of work. You have seen it before. We did bring it to you before months ago to ask for a release for a 60-day public comment period. So it went out for the 60-day comment period. We received about 139 comments from 11 entities or individuals. And so in your packet before you, you do see the criteria itself. We do have a comment response summary. So you can see what the comments were from individuals or organizations, and then our responses to them. And then you have this nice, as you can see on the screen here, graphical overview of the summary. So you can see how many comments came in, grouping them by what kind of comment they were relating to or what criteria they were relating to, just to have a little bit easier way to digest the criteria or the comments that we received, because there's a lot of them. These comments were reviewed by the TAC, the comment response summary, and the criteria. They did have a recommendation for 4 changes, and then they recommended approval of everything else. So I'm hoping Craig can help me with those 4 changes because I was not there at the meeting.
Should have brought my notes, huh? Would have been handy.
I can speak on them if you need.
If you can point out what page, I remember it was the one on safe routes to schools on the first page.
Yes, comment 14.
Okay. So on the first page, comment 14, it talks about designated safe school zones and that sort of thing. And the suggestion at the TAC was to add some language. If you remember, sorry to step back just a little bit, bounce around. We had a TIP criteria handbook that we put out at the same time. It was maybe a 4 or 5 page document that Aaron put together. It was super helpful and kind of helping folks to understand what the TIP was, what the criteria, all that sort of stuff. And so the suggestion was to add some language in that TIP criteria handbook that relates to safe routes to schools to help explain, many of the comments that we received were talking about helping to put the usually tech heavy and acronym heavy language that we use in transportation planning, try to put into the everyday language. So people that aren't transportation planning geeks can understand it. So that was part of what they wanted to do in this particular category, talking about safe routes to schools and help understand what exactly that means. So that was the suggestion, to add some language back in that TIP criteria handbook.
Really quickly, Ms. Zolotel has her hand.
Zelda?
Thank you. Yes, on the topic of safe routes to school, I see there's multiple comments about safe routes to school. I just want to stress, as we consider this criteria, how we can be integrating school safety, school transportation safety into the TIP criteria. I understand it's covered under the safety category, but there's considerable community concerns in multiple areas across town. And I think it's really an important issue. It took up a good portion of our last joint assembly and school board meeting as well. And they are looking for ways that they can better partner and advocate to ensure, student safety getting to school. There have been several incidents lately. And so I just wanted to highlight that as we consider the comments here before us. I think they're relevant and I think they're important, but they don't reflect, I think, the larger community conversation that continues to raise considerable safety concerns, particularly on Tudor and then down, I believe, in the either Rabbit Creek or Huffman area. Those might be the same. I'll have to say South Anchorage locations are not my strength. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Next comment was number 23 about the goals.
I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt, but I guess I was looking for, is there any impetus by staff or otherwise to consider that input beyond just referencing that it's in the safety category? I guess that was the question. I thought it was implied in what my comments were, but I would like to ask that question and get an answer.
Well, I guess this is Craig. My response would be that, I mean, when, the idea behind the criteria would be people are doing the work right now to track where there are incidences or above average instances of crashes involving pedestrians or bicyclists, et cetera, which would include certainly people walking to and from schools. And so the criteria that we have in place, we believe right now is going to capture any times when you have an incident occurring in a school zone. The main reason why we were talking about that particular comment is it referred to places where there were no designated school zones. And the only places in Anchorage where there are no designated school zones where there is a school that is not a neighborhood school. So if it's a charter school or some other school of that nature where it's not a neighborhood school, there are not designated walking zones on those schools because those students come from all over the city. So it'd be impossible to create those kind of, people don't walk to those schools for the most part. So that was the answer. That's why that answer came about in regards to that particular comment. I think in terms of capturing the any issues that might come up regarding kids walking to schools, those should already be captured by the crash data or anything like that occurs around a school, because the city and the state are already capturing that information. And we are going to use that information when we rank and score projects using this improved pedestrian safety category. I think we are already capturing it. That certainly, that's the discussions that we've had with the TAC and the folks with traffic engineering and with the state's traffic engineering. We think we're already capturing it. We certainly believe we are. That's why we recommended no changes from what we already have.
Okay, I appreciate the additional explanation. I guess my response is that we're finding that where there are even school zones and safe routes to schools, we're still encountering problems. And I guess I hope that gets evaluated in potential projects moving forward, because that seems to be the issue, is that even where there's already a designated safe route to school, there continue to be collisions and even sometimes pedestrian deaths.
Yeah, and I understand and appreciate that. My thinking is that the criteria as it's written is going to capture that information. So if there's an above average crash rate in an area near a school, it's going to trigger the highest points that you could get here. So I think it's already going to be captured. The only exception would be, say, around a charter school that doesn't have a neighborhood group walking to school there. So Aaron.
Well, we actually would capture that, because the thing that we wanted to try and do with our criteria is to be more inclusive. So we didn't leave out areas like the safety. The school zones are only around particular schools. And so if we only focus on these school zones, the school safety areas, we're going to be missing some of those areas that also need additional help. So I agree with Craig. I feel that our criteria already help us get to the point of addressing those areas that are both school zones and not school zones that have areas of concern.
Yeah, that's a good point, because, for example, around the school that my children went to, Winterberry School, it's in a neighborhood. If there was an above average crash incident there, regardless of whether or not I drove my kids from downtown to that school, the incidents would be captured by the crash data that both the city and the state are capturing. So Aaron's right, we would be capturing it regardless. So.
Okay, thank you. I think, relying on crash data is one way to do this, but it's not terribly proactive. And I understand that often we can't be as proactive as we would like to be, but I'll continue to have conversations about how this intersects with the concerns by the school board and the assembly. It's continuously raised, so I have the feeling we'll continue this conversation as we move through this process. Thanks.
I will say that we did add in the criteria, and we've never had this kind of information in there before, but we came to this conclusion by having the conversation with, it's actually Scott Thomas with DOT, started it, where we give an extra 2 points if the project site has no crash data, but MOA traffic and safety engineer and/or the DOT traffic engineer concur the project is expected to prevent crashes or serious injuries. So if we have a location that doesn't have any data out there right now, but the experts in the room can look at that and say, we could do something here that would solve this issue, even though there isn't a number of a data point there. You will get some points for that area, relying on the expertise of the safety engineers. So I think we're working towards capturing that information.
Great. And if someone can highlight that particular criteria for me, I didn't catch it. That would be really helpful information for me to take back. Thank you.
Yeah, it is under the first category under safety, and it's the third criteria under improves pedestrian safety. Right in the middle is the one I was referring to, but you'll see it throughout those ones where it says the project has no crash data, but the experts in the room basically expect that this project could help deal with that. That's my paraphrase.
Oh, I see that. I guess I just didn't relate that specifically to schools, but it would apply there along with everywhere else.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next one was comment number 23 regarding the goals. At least that's what I was told, but when you look at comment 23, it's doesn't really match up, because it was basically saying that we need to add something about the goals, that there are aspirational goals that AMATS is trying to achieve.
Right, and I believe we were talking about adding some language in the criteria handbook, again, about aspirational goals as opposed to the performance measures that the feds require us to track. So I think that was what it was, just adding some language back in the back.
And, my recommendation on that would be adding what we have in our MTP, because those are our goals and objectives that we as AMATS are trying to meet. The only question I would have for you guys is, are we adding the 2040 MTP goals and objectives or the draft 2050 goals and objectives? So, think about that. That's all I just bring up to think about, depending on what we want in there.
Can I make a comment on this item? Is that all right, Chair?
Yeah,
the chair.
Drive for municipal traffic engineer, and I think what it was is things that are asked to measure, specific measurable items is what it's referring to in the handbook, to have it be in some things that we don't currently have the tools to measure, but that there was a desire to include in the performance in the criteria here too. And so to list some of those, such as like, if you look at 23, it talks about, it says criteria to be more specific and measurable. And so, what are some things that we can measure? Like we can't, anyway, so listing a bunch of those sorts of things that are measurable. Does that make sense?
So that would be done as part of the MTP, because that's related to performance measures and targets.
Yeah.
And I don't recommend we do that as part of the TIP criteria, because if we're having the discussion, we need to wait until we do that as part of the MTP, which is going to be in a couple of months, just a heads up. We have a work session scheduled in January, so.
Yeah, and the comment directly relates to, it says, none of the proposed scoring criteria were points for mode shift from single occupancy vehicle travel. And that may be a great idea, but as Mr. Coy said, how do we actually measure that? I mean, that's more of an aspirational goal. It's an aspirational goal to take people away from single occupancy vehicle travel. It's great, but it's very challenging to measure, and AMATS would be, I don't know how we would actually measure that. So I think the idea would be to put some language in the back talking about some of these are aspirational goals. Great ideas.
Not in the handbook, not as a tip criteria, but just as
yeah.
a note that next time there's updates can be something that is just captured. That's what the discussion at that meeting was, that just so you're aware.
Discussion on item 23. Mr. Trumley, you had a discussion on item 21.
I do. So one of the issues with the hillside, we find this in Cherokee River, and we know that fire has been a big proponent of fire sprinklers on single access roads. And I'm curious, how does AMATS tie into that? Because we see that there's a safety category, but hillside has, LRSAs or 2GX subversas, so service areas, we'll just say service areas abroad. Can AMATS use money in service areas for secondary access or egress? So as you're shaking, you're shaking. Your head.
Yeah, so.
How's that identified? Because I think there's a whole bunch of areas that I would like to see secondary access to prevent the fire sprinkler systems for larger developments. And how does that tie in?
So there's a bunch, and I'll go over it, and then Craig can help if he has anything.
Sure.
So a good example of yes, we can is Mountain Air Drive. Mountain Air Drive was added to the tip as a secondary egress out of that area up in Hillside.
Okay.
One of the issues that we ran into was the match, needing the match for that, because it was outside of ARDSA, and at the time the municipality didn't have a mechanism to be able to provide the match for that project. However, I believe the assembly worked with the administration at the time to get something in place to allow bond funding, Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, but bond funding to be used as match even out in the LRSA areas.
So LRSAs can't do matches, Craig?
Well, they just don't usually have the ability to come up with enough.
Because it's so much, millions of dollars.
So, yeah.
Oh, I got you.
So
So it's not like they can just assess their mill rate, understanding that, hey, we may want to put a match in for this maybe 4 years down the road, and we can increase our mill rate every year. They could they do that if they were?
Whatever mechanism they
Yeah.
want to come up with for the funds. I mean,
Yeah.
when I got here was during the time when there was still a state capital budget. And so a lot of the match could come from
Right.
the state capital budget covering these local matches.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist anymore. And so it was just bond funds. And so, yes, we had a bridge over Eklunda River that sat there for a long time as Subversa out there tried to come up with
Yeah.
it. And they just couldn't.
Yeah,
And
okay.
they ended up getting a state grant actually, so. But
Okay,
yeah,
well, that's good to know. I was under the impression that AMATS money couldn't be used in that.
we can use
But I
it
didn't know,
on,
so that's good to know.
yeah, on any public right of way, basically.
Within our boundaries.
Within our boundaries.
Yep.
It just, you don't want to put a hole in the tip by adding something where there's no ability to come up with a match.
Right, so then,
And now that the assembly passed that with the administration, you can bond for things that are looking at emergency access out or egress routes.
okay, so in order for, if I've identified location A, whatever that location is, I would have to get that into the tip. And then it would be funded priority.
So yeah, then you'd identify the federal funds in the tip,
Yep,
and then the municipality would have to issue a bond for the match.
okay, so under the safety category, is there a dollar amount that we get every year for safety, or is there an allocation of percentage?
Not for safety specifically. We just
Okay.
get a general allocation, and then we as, the policy committee has set forth how much they want to put towards certain modes. So roadway gets a percentage, pavement gets a percentage, non-motorized, et cetera. So
Understood.
we don't have a separate one for safety. But I did want to point out, we do actually have a criteria in here for emergency access routes.
Oh,
Because it was identified during the last tip that was
Yep.
kind of an area where we needed some improvements.
yep,
Not just here, but Eagle River also did a bunch of work. Chugach Eagle River did a bunch of work years ago to identify egress routes that they would like to see for what you're talking about. So we have a whole map for it. So we probably need to do something similar for the bowl at Hillside and wherever to come up with, a way to identify those. And those can be nominated as part of the TIF nomination project to score and rank. But we
okay,
did include a criteria in there for it.
okay, thanks.
Okay, so the next comment that the TA, is anyone online? Okay, so the next comment that the TAC had was about 25. Number 25. Well, that was the,
That was
That was
the
the-
dependence on, it's similar, those aspirational goals, I think.
So a similar aspirational goals language they are asking that we add to the TIP narrative. And then the last,
I'm sorry, excuse me, to the chair. Mr. Woodall was recommending using the reducing instead of significant problems.
okay, we'll have to look that one up.
Yeah. It originally said shifting away from single occupancy in number 23, and he recommended using that language in number 25 to reduce occupancy.
Okay. Okay, next comment was comment 104. So it was asked at that point to provide additional clarity on this particular comment. In this comment, staff's response is that the items listed in this comment are a little too prescriptive for what we do at this point in the TIP nomination process. The commenter was asking us that no increase in impenetrable surface, maximal use of vegetative, low heat absorption materials, drainage, no loss of wetlands, and staying within the existing developed right-of-way. You know, that's all design work that needs to be done later in the project development. We have in our criteria already items that help address this in our environmental criteria itself. And I believe Ms. Zolotel has her hand up.
Ms. Alto?
Thank you. And thanks for that, Aaron. Can you talk a little bit more about how the environmental criterion at the TIP scoring level address some of these specifics raised? I understand they're quite prescriptive, but this will allow us to go back and have further conversations about how this particular comment is somewhat already addressed.
So some of the items may not be addressed. You know, we don't do anything in our criteria about wildlife movement. So I can't speak to that one, but we do actually have a section in our environmental criteria under environmental impacts / project deliverability, where it talks about project is expected to have limited or no impact to right-of-way, wetlands, historic property, or other environmentally sensitive areas. So that's our attempt to try and take a higher level planning look at these projects when they're nominated and scored to say, okay, what kind of impact are we going to have in the area? So it is kind of addressing what this individual is asking for, but it's not getting to that level of, okay, it may have right-of-way impacts, we're not going to have any right-of-way impacts, and we're going to put that in the description of the project. Because that, you know, from my perspective as a planner, that would be far too prescriptive of that, because we don't know what we're going to need to get that project in. Say it needs some kind of non-motorized facility that may have some right-of-way impacts. We don't want to sit there and say, no right-of-way impacts while the non-motorized facility is not happening. We need to be flexible in our approach to these projects. So I think what they're asking for in the description or the comment is too prescriptive, whereas what we have in the criteria is allowing that flexibility that we need in the development of these projects.
Okay, and may I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
So when we look for potential impacts, you know, at the TIP level, are those impacts identified through other plans potentially, like comprehensive land use plan or wetlands mitigation plans? Is there somewhere we turn to look if a proposed project might have those impacts?
Yes, we can. Like the historic properties, there is historic property information out there that we can look at to see what kind of impact is this project going to have in the area for the historic properties that are identified. We do work with our partners at the Muni and DOT to review these projects for cost estimating purposes, where they help provide some of the information about what kind of impacts are going to be occurring as part of this project. Granted, that is a very high level analysis of the project. And correct.
Oh, okay, I appreciate that. I mean, I think to the extent that we can tie it toward other opportunities where some of these impacts can be identified as just if they're natural features in existing and other plans to inform this, I think it provides a lot more certainty in some ways or I guess predictability of what might be allowed and might not be allowed. Thank you.
I did want to just follow up really quickly. One good thing that is very helpful for us is the GIS system that's out there that the municipality of Anchorage has worked very hard, and DOT has worked very hard in their systems as well to get a lot of this information that we're talking about here into a format that's easier for us to be able to see with our kind of limited view at this point. Craig, I think you had something.
Yeah, what I was going to add is just, if it helps at all, just a quick description of how the process works when we go to rank and score projects. So we put out the call for nominations, and then we also look at the existing plans that we have, such as the MTP, non-motorized plan, et cetera. And we usually have someone from DOT in the room. We have maybe 2 people from DOT. We have someone from long range planning who has that wetlands expertise. We have someone from transportation planning. We have someone from project management and engineering, so that when we're in the room and we're looking at a project, we have those experts in the room that can say, oh, I know where that project is. I know there are wetlands here. I know there's a lot of right-of-way impacts that would be needed. And so, as Aaron said, we also now have the GIS system that the Muni has that is really, really impressive. And it has so many different capabilities of helping us see what we're looking at when we look at a project. A lot of the projects have been scored and ranked a lot of times because they've been around for a while, but we do get new ones. And so we have the right people in the room to look at those things, and using those different GIS layers to help us as we're trying to determine what kind of points they would get in this sort of category, whether they would have wetlands impacts or historic property impacts, et cetera.
Thank you for that. I'm just thinking through, the community is probably most heavily involved in the district plans or the comprehensive land use plan from, a municipal side. And to the extent that it anticipates, those potential sensitive areas or where impacts to sensitive areas can be, then, they're going to be looking for if a project, impacts something they're aware of. It's just, as I think through the process, it's a way to, again, maybe not get latent community concern because it was already either identified as an area or it wasn't identified an area and it was already at top of mind when those plans were either updated or developed. Thank you.
So those are the 4 comments that the TAC had, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, Craig, sorry.
Yeah, Brad Carter, traffic engineer. I think the last one, I think all we wanted was the staff response says basically the proposed recommendations, this is 1 of 4, right? Proposed recommendations which are descriptive, and have it just say these items are looked at when the project goes to its design in a more thorough and complete fashion. And trying to do that as part of the TIP criteria is just a lot of work for every single project. So that's why the TIP criteria was a little more general and having some expert qualitative instead of getting too quantitative too quickly for everything, is my recollection. Do you remember that discussion?
Yeah, I agree with it. At the level of detail that you're looking at a TIP nomination, you're not digging into the details on the bulleted list here, but they are evaluated through the project development process.
Yeah, we want to make sure that we're not suggesting projects be put in the TIP that have just non-starters. If we know that there's a huge elevation challenge in an area, we don't want to put that in the TIP knowing that it's not going to be able to go. And so those are the big items that we try to catch early. But obviously, when it starts going through the NEPA process, all of this stuff has to be looked at before it can be moved further. We want to make sure we don't put a hole in the TIP that just the project gets stuck there, and at some point, well, we just take it out, and the money's been parked there for a while, not doing any good. So.
Okay, that's all we have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Aaron.
Oh, I guess I should finish up my spiel. So what we're asking for today is approval of the TIP criteria with the TAC recommended changes and any additional changes you all may have. Once we're done with that, and if it gets approved today, we will move on to the next step, which is a call for nominations.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Any questions or comments from the committee? Additional questions, comments?
Ms. Alatel has.
Yeah, Ms. Alta?
Thank you. On the TIP scoring criteria itself, I'm looking under, for example, mobility. It feels a little counterintuitive, and I know we've talked about it before, but I want to talk about it one more time. The bonus point for a project located within an EJ area of the 60th or greater percentile, and then the penalty with the same language and will negatively impact population. Can you remind me, I see the asterisks there, what are those negative impacts? I just simply have examples of transit supported when I find the first asterisk. So I'm having a hard time tying those together.
Yeah, we do have it down on under mobility. If you go to the end of the mobility one, we do have the asterisk down there that talks about what negative impacts to EJ populations are, and we give some examples. So I'll just list them off here. And putting up barriers to mobility, so making it harder for people to be able to either access and or utilize the transportation system. Negative economic impacts, negative aesthetics and visual effects, relocation and displacement, and negative impacts to land use.
Got it. Thank you. I'm just going to make a suggestion. I appreciate that each one is at the end of the particular area, but maybe different symbols for each area just would make it a little bit easier to track them. And then I just want to comment overall that I think the TIP scoring criteria update is a good one. I think it's much more responsive or is quite responsive to a lot of what was heard throughout the 2040 comments. And it's really trying to capture some of the priorities that have been stated. I think it'll be interesting to see how these work in application, because some of these things feel very subjective. So it will be very interesting to see how these terms are ultimately defined when applied to a project. But overall, a wonderful job here on really taking the feedback and moving through the scoring criteria that I think better reflects the community's goals. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Strong?
Sure, I have a question on 132, comment 132. God bless Debbie Osiander. I spent a lot of time with her on the assembly, and she's very, very thoughtful, and she's very protective of Cherokee River, obviously, and I'm happy that she is. I'm just curious how you would, I'd like to know a little bit more than just your staff response. I agree the Cherokee River plan is outdated and does need to be updated, but how would you address specifically at the very end, she says Hillside, Cherokee River are kind of out of contention based on the, when you look at the TIP projects and the scoring and all that kind of stuff. How would you address that for our folks in Cherokee River and the Hillside that maybe feel the same way?
So this is Craig again. I would suggest that if you look at the projects that are in the current TIP, most of them are currently on the Hillside. It's got Abbott and O'Malley on there. So I don't think you could say we leave the Hillside out. In previous TIPs, we certainly funded different projects out in Chugach-Eagle River, and we continue to. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't. But every time I've done the exercise in the past over the last 18 years, it's the proportion of funding over a 4-year life cycle of a TIP usually seems to be pretty comparable to the actual population out there.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything in here that is going to penalize Chugach-Eagle River. We certainly don't, that's not the intention. You can look at my house and see that nothing has happened around my house with federal funds since I've been here. So, I'm not looking at things that are just designed to help downtown or Midtown or whatever. We spread it out, and Debbie was on the policy committee for several years, and she was one of my favorite policy committee members ever. She did her homework, and it's great. So I think, I can only say that we don't intend to do that, and we certainly have in the past funded projects out there with regularity. I'm I can't promise, but I certainly would direct Aaron, if you wanted me to have the staff look at the percentages that have gone to Chugach Eagle River or Hillside or outside of Arts or whatever over the last however many years, and we can do that exercise. I'm sure that you can see on average, there's a pretty decent balance.
Okay.
As for the Chugach Eagle River comp plan, I think is what she's referring to there. Yeah, it's
outdated.
It's outdated, and that doesn't have anything to do with AMATS.
No, it doesn't.
Um,
I get it. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Strong. Additional questions and comments from the committee? All right, hearing none. Any comments from the public? All right. What is the will of the committee?
Just motion to approve. Right? Yeah. Move to approve.
Move to approve by Mr. Trauma,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Alatel. And then at this point, we would be looking at amendment to add in the considerations, or is that it?
Well, I mean, Mr. Trombley could move to approve with the recommended changes. You could do that, and then you'd solve it in one.
Okay.
So it would be move to approve this document, right? With the changes.
I think you would want to move to approve the criteria as written
Move to
with
approve.
the staff response if there are any changes suggested along with those other four. So move to approve with those changes. You can be as prescriptive as you want, or you can say,
Move to approve.
we trust you guys.
I just want to make sure I get it right.
Yeah.
Criteria, to approve the criteria with staff changes. I'll move to approve the criteria with staff changes.
So moved by Mr. Trombley. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Seconded by Ms. Alatel. Are there any objections to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you.
Moving to action item 5C, major amendment to the 2021 AMATS Unified Planning Work Program Budget. Aaron, will you be presenting?
I will actually turn this all over to my friend Craig.
So what we have is an amendment to the 2021 AMATS work program budget. So you just approved in item 5A the 2022 budget. So the 2021 budget, this is where we're asking you to make an amendment to that budget. There are a couple of things that are going on. And I apologize that it gets a little convoluted, but I think it'll make sense as we go. So the first thing that happened is in our 2021 budget, when we created it, we certainly didn't plan for a pandemic. And so what happened is one AMAT staff member was tasked to the Emergency Operations Center for about half the year. And so obviously he did not charge to AMATS because he wasn't doing AMATS work. In addition, he is active in the AMEA union. And so he has a certain amount of time every week that he spends in grievances or in negotiating the contract right now, I think. So there was a significant amount of time that he did not charge to AMATS. And so we had a chunk of funds that were not going to be spent with AMATS this year. And the second thing that happened was we usually get all the planning funds come through the DOT and to AMATS to spend. And in this case, the FHWA, actually the Department of Administration of the state of Alaska wanted to charge ICAP on the AMATS planning funds. FHWA originally said, no, you can't do that. And then they said, okay, actually, now that we look at it, you can spend. You can take some cut off of there. So it's overhead that would go to the state of Alaska to administer these funds. And so that will happen in 2022 with the AMATS funds. The state of Alaska Department of Administration wanted to do that same thing with the Federal Transit Administration funds for transit planning that go to the Public Transportation Department here at the municipality. In this case, the FTA folks have said, no, you can't do that. And it's been a case of, let's see who blinks first, and neither side is blinking. I believe that Public Transit Department was expecting that they would let it go for this year. The state of Alaska would let it go for this year, and so transit would get their allocation of 5303 transit planning funds. And so what happened is they didn't blink, and they are not releasing those funds. And so the Public Transportation Department has had to cover those transit planning funds out of their own pot of funds, and I'm assuming it's property tax funds that are being covered, so it's not federal funds. And it's around $300,000 that they were originally planning on using those property tax funds for other purposes, and they've had to fill in the blank over here because they have staff doing transit planning as required by federal law, but they don't have any federal funds to do it. So the planet's lined up. AMATS did not use about 300,000 of their funds, and transit has need for that. And so what we're asking here is we always had the 600 element, which was transit. It's inside the work program. You see it in the work program that you just adopted, but it was those 5303 funds. In this case, we're trying to move over some of the regular AMATS allocation down to those categories. We're not able to identify up to that 300,000. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact dollar figure, but it's a little under 200 and some odd $1,000. If someone does math quickly, they could do it, but that's not me. But that's what we're asking you to do, to move those funds that are AMATS Federal Transportation Planning Funds and move them into the Public Transportation Department Federal Transportation or Transit Planning Funds. So they're all eligible expenses. It's all federal funds. It's just helping them so they can be made whole to the extent that we can do that, and make sure we have enough, AMATS has enough to continue to do the work that they need to do for the rest of the year, but also not have a giant hole in their program. So happy to answer questions. I know Jamie Acton was online earlier on the call, and if you have specific questions about what they were doing with those funds, we could do that, but I think it's pretty clear those are all regular transit planning tasks that they're listing down there that we're looking to fund.
All right, thank you, Craig. Any questions or comments from the committee?
Ms. Zolotel has a question.
Ms. Alto?
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation, Craig. Do we expect this just to be a one-time situation, or do you think this will occur again in the future?
Well, I will say this, that we have been told that what they want to do, the feds want to do from here on out is to do a consolidated planning grant so that AMATS would get both the transit funds and the AMATS PL in one block, and they would all come to AMATS through FHWA. They would take the ICAP off of it automatically, and then AMATS would distribute the portion of the funds that belong to transit over to them. So for the future, this won't be an issue because we'll be getting all of the funds here at AMATS, and AMATS will allocate it over there. So does that answer that question?
It does. So then I just have a quick comment, and that's thanks for finding a way to cover this. You know, I'm a little bit hesitant if we can find a dynamic solution to something, that it becomes a way not to have someone else take care of it in the future. But if this is a one-time, really great job making sure that this transit planning that's required is covered, but acknowledging the unique circumstances that allow it to happen. Thank you.
I will say this too, I should have added this, is that the TAC did not get to hear this because we didn't hear until last week that they weren't going to blink, and they weren't going to allow transit to use the money in 21 the way they had intended, and they would revisit it next year. So we just found out, so there just wasn't an opportunity to do this. It does say in the work program that these kinds of amendments do not require a public comment period, and that they are approved by the policy committee and DOT, and then they're sent on to the federal overseers for their approval. So again, the policy committee is the final arbiter of all things AMATS. Everyone else is advisory to you folks. But that's why you don't see anything here that says the TAC recommended approval at their meeting, because we just heard last week and we scrambled to try and figure out. I did the math here. on my calculator because it's not me in my head. It's $216,525 is what it totals that we would be sending over to transit. So that's the current plan.
All right, any other questions or comments from the committee? Hearing none. Any comments from the public?
We do have a comment from Adam Moser. Adam, are you, Adam Moser, it looks like he has something to say or comment.
Mr. Moser?
Thank you, yes, to the chair and the policy board. Just an update on those 303 grant funds from FTA. Just this afternoon, we did get word that FTA has approved that. The state of Alaska did put forth a waiver on the ICAP there. That is an issue we are still working with Federal Highway and FTA about for the long-term resolution on that issue. However, it does look like Anchorage Transit Agency there should be able to access those funds potentially sometime in the coming weeks. The FTA has approved that, but we have to get that set up in the grant system for the state. So that's just an update on that. I'm not sure if that's going to influence anything, but so that know that those funds should be forthcoming to Anchorage Transit Agency.
So, Adam, this is Craig. Does that mean that the 21 funds would be available to them?
These are actually fiscal year 18 funds, I think, that they were applying for, but yes, they're coming through for the current year. Sorry, no, these were actually applied for at the end of FY21. And yes, they will be what we applied for at the very end of FY21, got in, are now is approved by FTA. They're releasing them to the state. We should have those cleaned up and ready for to be billed against or billed to sometime in the coming weeks. Don't want to give too specific of a date there because I'm not that familiar with the process on the state side. And it looks like Jamie has her hand up as well. She may have some comments there regarding that as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, a second.
Hi, Jamie Acton, Public Transportation Department Director. Thank you for taking this item up. This has been a critical piece for us as we've acted in good faith for over a year waiting on these funds. I just want to make a note that yes, we did get notification from the DOT Transit Office today that the application has been approved. However, there's many steps still to come for us to be able to bill against this funding, and it will not likely be in time for us to bill our 2021 expenses. So this is still something that we need to have happen to be able to close out the year and to be able to make sure that we are in good standing and make sure that the expenses that we have paid out are appropriate and basically just cover the program as we have intended.
So you still need us to do this amendment?
Yes.
Okay, making sure.
Quickly. If Adam, if you're online, can you please state your name for the record? We forgot to have you do that before you started speaking.
Yes, apologies. Adam Moser, State of Alaska DOT and PF, Division of Program Development, Statewide Planning.
Thank you.
All right, any additional comments from the public? Hearing none. What is the will of the committee?
Move to approve the major amendment to the 2021 Unified Planning Work Program budget.
Moved by Mr. Trauma,
Second.
second by Ms. Salatel. Are there any objections to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Aaron, are there any other action items?
There are no other action items.
There are no project and plan updates on the agenda, so we'll move on to agenda item number 7, general information. there any general information? All right. No, as the committee has no general information items, we'll move on to item 8, committee comments. Does the committee have any comments to add today?
I have one, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Alto.
Yes, thank you. On the ability to provide comment on the MTP 2050 as to the goals and objectives, I wanted to provide the feedback. We had Rogers Park Community Council took this up at their December meeting, their particular comments. They illustrated that it's very hard for a community council to deal with comments on something as complex, even as the goals and objectives of the MTP as proposed in one meeting. So they do intend to comment, but those comments will not come until after their meeting in January. I had told them I would raise the issue. I hope their comments will still be considered. They delayed taking quick action because they did want their comments to be thoughtful. While some members of the community council put together a comment chart, others didn't get an opportunity to go through and probably aren't as familiar with the MTP process. So I know the MTP is always a time crunched process, but I wanted to raise this particular situation so that one, staff are aware of it, and two, we consider it as we continue to refine the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alto.
Thank you. So I had a couple of items. One, just to give you guys a heads up, we're looking at doing a work session with the TAC and the Policy Committee January, sometime in the last couple of weeks of January, to start the performance measures, target, and criteria development for the MTP. So we'll take those goals and objectives, and any goals and objectives comments that are submitted even after the deadline will be considered. It's just we have our formal comment period that we highly encourage people to get their comments into, but people will comment throughout the document, so we'll always consider it. But we'll take the goals and objectives and use those to help develop performance measures, targets, and criteria. Just a heads up, that will be a intensive work session because performance measures and targets tend to be a lot. So we will try our best to make it as fun and smooth for you guys as possible. We'll provide snacks and treats and other things. So just wanted to give you guys a good heads up on that. We'll probably send out a doodle poll about that to see when works best for everyone. And then my second item, I just wanted to say goodbye to Craig. I know he's not going anywhere, but he has spent a good number of years being the leader of AMATS for staff and helping to guide everyone through everything. So I just wanted to extend a thank you very much for everything over the years. It's been greatly appreciated, I know, by me, and I'm fairly certain all the other staff who's here now and who has come through over the years. And we wish you best in your next endeavors.
Thank you. 18 short years. Someone else can do it.
All right, thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Are there any other committee comments? Move on to item 9, public comments. Are there any comments from the public?
We did get a couple of comments, one from Jamie Acton and one from Bart Rudolph saying, thank you, Craig, and congrats, Craig.
All right, moving on to item 10, adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Moved by Mr. Trauma.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Pocan. Are there any objections to approving the motion? All right, hearing none, the motion is approved. The meeting is adjourned at 2:35 p.m.
Thank you.